Hello everyone, Zira here. Now we are going to listen to the news as podcast news from our channel. Editorials and important news for the date of May 7, 2021. Listening improves the quality of communication and comprehension. Before going ahead, I would like to welcome you all to the virtual school. A new way of learning and teaching, with the vision of Let's Grow Together. Our mission is to learn how to learn and teach how to teach. So stay tuned. And here we go. Front page. SC wants formula on oxygen supply ahead of third wave. It draws government attention to reports that children may be affected in next wave. Legal correspondent, New Delhi. The Supreme Court on Thursday highlighted the need for the union government to start preparations for oxygen allocation to the states and its supply and distribution ahead of a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The court drew the attention of the government to reports that children may be affected in the next wave. A bench of Justices D.Y. Chandrachud and M.R. Shah said the government needed to finalize a formula for allocation, supply, and distribution of oxygen in a scientific manner ahead of the coming wave. It said the rough and ready formula devised presently on the oxygen for bed arrangement would hardly work. The current formula of allocating oxygen to Delhi, for example, on the basis of the number of ICU/non-ICU beds, grossly underestimated need for oxygen. Also, not everyone who went to a hospital required an oxygen bed, and not everyone required ICU or ventilator. There are many who have been asked to stay at home and quarantine, Justice Chandrachud said, picking holes in the formula. The court said the formula for allocation and distribution of oxygen should be based, among other things, on an oxygen audit, that is, to determine the actual need of oxygen in a state. We need to reassess the basis for oxygen allocation. We are in stage 2 of the pandemic. Stage 3 might have very different parameters. But, if we prepare today, we will be able to handle stage 3. It is about proper allocation of oxygen and working out the modalities, including proper distribution. A buffer stock has also to be created, Justice Chandrachud pointed out. The court underlined the importance of vaccination. Children are going to be affected. They will be taken into hospitals. They will be accompanied by parents. Vaccination needs to be done, it stated. Solicitor General Tushar Mehta, while informing the court that 730.7 metric tons of oxygen was received in Delhi on Wednesday as directed by the bench, agreed that a minimum fault-prone formula for oxygen supply, allocation, and distribution was the need of the hour. The government agreed to revisit the formula. At one point, the court suggested incentivizing young doctors, who have completed their courses, and young trained nurses to augment the fatigued healthcare professionals. Supreme Court declines EC plea to restrain media reports. It is part of the right to freedom of speech, says Apex Court. Krishnadas Rajagopal NEW Delhi. Real-time reportage of court proceedings, including the oral exchanges in courtrooms between judges and lawyers, is part of the right to freedom of speech, the Supreme Court held in a judgment. With the advent of technology, we are seeing reporting proliferate through social media forums which provide real-time updates to a much wider audience. This is an extension of the freedom of speech and expression that the media possesses. This constitutes a virtual extension of the open court, a bench led by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud observed in a judgment. Such live reporting of court proceedings is a cause of celebration rather than apprehension. Madras HC remarks. The court declined a plea made by the Election Commission of India to restrain the media from reporting oral remarks made by a division bench of the Madras High Court. The HC judges had said that full-body officials should be charged with murder for allowing rallies and mass gatherings during the Tamil Nadu Assembly elections. The judges had remarked that the EC was solely responsible for the COVID surge. In the judgment, Justice Chandrachud said the case posed a delicate balancing of powers between the HC and the ECI, which are both constitutional authorities. The court said that except in cases of child sexual abuse and marital issues, the phenomenon of free press should extend to court proceedings. Citizens have a right to know about what transpires in the course of judicial proceedings. The dialogue in a court indicates the manner in which a judicial proceeding is structured. Arguments addressed before the court, the response of opposing counsel and issues raised by the court are matters on which citizens have a legitimate right to be informed, Justice Chandrachud observed. The court referred to how the Gujarat High Court had recently introduced live streaming of its proceedings in a bid to enhance public participation in the dispensation of justice. In this backdrop, it would be retrograde for this court to promote the rule of law and access to justice on one hand, and shield the daily operations of the high courts and this court from the media in all its forms, by gagging the reporting of proceedings, Justice Chandrachud said. The court said oral observations made during course of a hearing do not bind the parties and do not form a part of the judgment. An exchange of views was intrinsic to the applicability of mind and the process of judging. On the nature of the remarks made by the Madras HC, the apex court said a degree of caution and circumspection would have allayed the problems in the present case. All said and done, this is in the past and does not constitute a part of the record. The court said the remarks may have been a manifestation of anguish at the rising cases of COVID. We must emphasize the need for judges to exercise caution in off-the-cuff remarks in open court, which may be susceptible to misinterpretation. Language, both on the bench and in judgments, must comport with judicial propriety. Language is an important instrument of a judicial process which is sensitive to constitutional values, Justice Chandrachud noted. Death toll zooms in weeks in 15 UP districts. Several backward and rural districts bear the brunt of second COVID-19 wave. Omar Rashid Lucknow. While major districts such as Lucknow, Varanasi, Prayagraj, and Kanpur continue to be the worst affected by the pandemic, recorded deaths due to COVID-19 doubled or tripled in 15 districts of Uttar Pradesh, including many smaller and relatively rural centers, over the past 3 weeks. In another 3 dozen-odd districts, the death toll also increased substantially over the same period. UP has 75 districts. From April 15 to May 5, the death count doubled or tripled in Hathras, Kasganj, Mohoba, Chitrakoot, Badahi, Hamirpur, Bagpat, Amethi, Auraiya, Jalan, Bunda, Ghaziabad, Sombudra, Chandali, and Gautam Buddha Nagar, as per the official data of the State Health Department. The death toll in Kasganj increased 5-fold from 6 to 30, Mohoba 13 to 34, Chitrakoot 17 to 50, Badahi 31 to 63, Hamirpur 21 to 61, Auraiya 50 to 106, Jalan 53 to 136, Bunda 48 to 118, Bagpat 36 to 76, Amethi 44 to 88, Chandali 76 to 204, Sombudra 82 to 161. While the death toll almost tripled in Ghaziabad from 104 to 288, a similar trajectory was seen in neighbouring Gautam Buddha Nagar, where the recorded deaths rose from 98 to 271. Mohoba, Bunda, Hamirpur, Chitrakoot, and Jalan are all in the drought-prone region of Bundelkhand, while Auraiya, Sombudra, Chandali are among the backward and rural-dominated districts in the state. Rural polls link. In more than 3 dozen other districts, including many small and backward centers, the deaths due to COVID-19 have seen a steady and substantial rise. In the last 2 weeks, opponents of the ruling BJP as well its own lays and teachers unions have said that COVID-19 was rapidly spreading in rural UP, with many blaming the recently concluded Panchayat polls for the increase in cases and deaths. In Kannauj, the deaths rose from 55 to 86, Busti 100 to 82, Hapur 68 to 105 and Etava 111 to 208. The state government on May 5 launched a testing drive for COVID-19 in all 97,000 revenue villages. Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath instructed officials to carry out door-to-door screening and checking of temperature and oxygen levels of people and tests of people with symptoms. UP on May 6 recorded 26,789 fresh positive cases out of 2.25 lakh samples tested, as against 31,165 positive cases out of 2.32 lakh samples on May 5. However, the number of daily deaths only dropped marginally over the 24 hours, from 357 to 353. On May 6, Lucknow recorded 65 deaths while 49 died in Kanpur, which has officially recorded 161 deaths in 3 days. Monitoring panels. CM Adityanath said in the screening by monitoring committees in the villages 69,474 persons were found to be symptomatic and when tested, 3,551 were found positive. They were provided medical kits for home isolation, the government said. Doctors should be in constant contact with these patients through teleconsultation. Advanced medical facilities should also be provided to them as per the requirement, Mr. Adityanath instructed officials. EU to discuss US vaccine patent plan at Friday summit. Reuters Geneva. France joined the United States on Thursday in supporting an easing of patent and other protections on COVID-19 vaccines that could help poorer countries get more doses and speed up the end of the pandemic. The move to support waiving intellectual property protections on vaccines under World Trade Organization rules marked a dramatic shift for the United States and drew cheers from activists, complaints from Big Pharma, and a lot of questions about what comes next. Attention is now turning to those richer nations, notably in the European Union, and France was the first to voice its support. I completely favor this opening up of the intellectual property, French President Emmanuel Macron said. Russian President Vladimir Putin also said he supported the idea of a waiver on patent protections for coronavirus vaccines. Nasht hurt an IED blast near residence. Mira Srinivasan, Colombo. Speaker and former President of the Maldives Mohamed Nasht was injured in an explosion in Capital Mail on Thursday night. He sustained injuries and was admitted to a local hospital. Deputy Speaker Eva Abdullah tweeted, following an explosion near his residence, Speaker of Parliament President Mohamed Nasht has sustained injuries and is currently receiving treatment at ADK Hospital. We will keep the public informed on President Nasht's condition as we receive updates. According to sources, the explosion took place when Mr. Nasht was about to get into his car, just after 8:30 p.m. local time, near his residence. Preliminary reports indicated that an improvised explosive device, IED, apparently fastened to a two-wheeler parked nearby, had blown up, injuring the speaker and one of his bodyguards. Tweeting on the development, Foreign Minister Abdullah Shahid said, strongly condemn the attack on Speaker of Parliament, President at Mohamed Nasht this evening. Cowardly attacks like these have no place in our society. My thoughts and prayers are with President Nasht and others injured in this attack, as well as their families. Search has exposed medical infrastructure. HC takes grim view of reports of hoarding and black marketing of oxygen cylinders, COVID medicines. Workers refilling oxygen cylinders at a plant in Mayapuri in Delhi on Thursday. Shiv Kumar Pushpakar. Staff reporter, New Delhi. The Delhi High Court on Thursday observed that the current surge in COVID-19 cases has completely exposed the existing medical infrastructure of the capital and that the Delhi government's council was behaving like the ostrich with its head in the sand. The stern observation of a bench of Justices Vipin Sanghai and Rekha Pali came when senior advocate Rahul Mehra, representing the Delhi government, urged the court not to include certain remarks about the state of medical infrastructure in Thursday's order. You, Mr. Mehra, are behaving like the ostrich with its head in the sand. When you defend this situation, you are not rising above politics. We always call a spade, the court said. The existing medical infrastructure in the state is completely exposed, when it was put to test, and this court cannot turn away people like the petitioner, a COVID patient, by merely telling him that the state does not have the infrastructure to deal with his situation, the High Court said. Mr. Mehra, who initially urged the court not to say that Delhi's infrastructure is struggling or that it was in a shambles, later withdrew his statement. Mr. Mehra said that the government has taken several initiatives, but in the absence of oxygen, the hospitals were reducing beds. The High Court was hearing a plea by a 53-year-old COVID patient seeking an ICU bed with a ventilator as his oxygen saturation levels had fallen to around 40. Equal treatment. While ordering the government to provide sufficient infrastructure to undergo the treatment required to save his life, the court added that the 53-year-old not being able to approach the court cannot be a reason to pass an order in his favor so that he can steal a march over others who may not have had the same option. We cannot lose sight of the fact that thousands of others are afflicted by the same disease in the city and whose condition may be as bad as that of the petitioner, if not worse, the court said. The bench closed the petition with a direction to the Delhi government to ensure that medical treatment is provided to all who are suffering from COVID-19. In case they require hospitalization, it shall be provided. If medicines, it shall be provided. If oxygen, it shall be provided. If ICU with or without a ventilator, the state would be obligated to provide that too, the court said. The bench also took a grim view of reports of hoarding and black marketing of oxygen cylinders and medicines used for treating COVID-19. We are still not understanding the gravity of the situation, and that is why we are not coming together, which is why we are seeing instances of hoarding and black marketing. Our moral fabric has been dismembered to a great extent, the High Court remarked. Burial of COVID-19 victim opposed in Manipur. Citizenship question group says 42-year-old professor was not indigenous to state. Special correspondent Guwahati. A Manipur-based group has opposed the burial of a COVID-19 victim who taught in a Haryana university but was born in adjoining Myanmar. The United Naga Council, UNC, mourned the death of the 42-year-old Neginbao Kipchen at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi on May 2 but questioned his citizenship and the legal ground for the burial of his body in Manipur's Kangpokpi district. The UNC said Dr. Kipchen, who headed the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at the Jindal University, was not indigenous to Manipur and asked if he had acquired Indian citizenship under the due procedure. Unfailing consideration. This question is undoubtedly important for an unfailing consideration in a multi-ethnic society like the state of Manipur, the council said on Wednesday. The Thadu NP, the apex body of the Thadu community, had sought permission from the district authorities to let the ambulance carrying Dr. Kipchen's body stop for 30 minutes for people to pay their last respect as per customary practices. Granting the permission, Kangpokpi Deputy Commissioner Somorjit Salam issued an order on May 5 for adherence to COVID protocols during the homage rituals and burial at Likot village in the district's Setogamphazal subdivision. Buried on Wednesday. Dr. Kipchen was buried late Wednesday evening. The Thadu Students Association, General Headquarters said Dr. Kipchen was a citizen by convention although he was born in Tijang village in Myanmar. His relatives are from Kangpokpi and his wife is from Churachandpur, Manipur. He did all his schooling in Manipur, did his PhD in Hyderabad after studying in the US in between, and has been teaching in India, a spokesperson of the association said. The Thadus belong to the Kuki-Chin group who live on either side of the India-Myanmar border. Many are believed to have crossed over to Manipur since the 1940s. Thank you. Editorial 1. Hat-trick onus is on Ms. Banerjee to end violence and triumphalism of her supporters. Mamata Banerjee was sworn in as Chief Minister of West Bengal for a third consecutive term on Wednesday, following the resounding victory of the Trinamool Congress, TMC, in the Assembly election. The TMC has won 213 seats, compared to 77 won by its principal challenger the BJP. The TMC's 47.9% vote share is an all-time high for any party, and nearly 10 percentage points more than that of the BJP. The Left Congress alliance drew a blank, another first in the electoral history of the state. The sheen of the TMC's astounding success has been somewhat dimmed by violence, attributed largely to its cadres, that has claimed at least 14 lives since the counting of votes on Sunday. True, TMC workers have also been killed, but as the ruling party, the onus is on it to end the violence. It is reassuring that Ms. Banerjee has promised after taking oath that ending the violence and controlling the pandemic were her priorities. She must not read this colossal mandate as a public endorsement or even tolerance of the grassroots ferocity and authoritarianism that have become hallmarks of her party. Ms. Banerjee's personal responsibility is high considering that people reposed their trust in her despite the high-handedness of local TMC leaders. The burden on her is heavy, and she has a tough act to do in reigning in her own party. As much as the Bengal verdict is in favor of the TMC, it is also against the BJP, which did not want to take an organic route to emerge as a natural party of governance in Bengal. Without a party organization and mass leaders, it engineered defections, tried brazen communal polarization and misused central agencies, as it went for the jugular. Its bombast and hubris were out of touch with the sensibilities of Bengalis. Its growth from 3 seats in 2016 to its current tally is impressive. The BJP must now pause and rethink its strategy for the path ahead. Its attempts to give a communal color to condemnable political violence indicates that the BJP is not open to that. If it wants to be a truly national party, the BJP must be respectful of India's regional, religious, and cultural diversities. The Congress and the CPI-M, that sought to overcome their failure to build a programmatic politics through opportunistic alliances, including with the communal Indian Secular Front, must also now learn that there are no shortcuts in politics. With the TMC reigning supreme, and the BJP falling short in understanding the state, the opposition space can still be fought for. To reclaim relevance, these parties need to replace their current leaders, do some honest soul searching, and build a new politics. A lending hand. The RBI has signaled it is aware of the burden on healthcare providers during this period. The Reserve Bank of India's move on Wednesday to step in and join the fight against the second wave of the pandemic through the announcement of measures aimed at alleviating any financing constraint for those impacted, including the healthcare sector, state governments, and the public, is a welcome and timely intervention. The furious pace at which new COVID-19 infections and fatalities have been mounting in recent weeks has not only overwhelmed the nation's health infrastructure but has begun to significantly impair economic activity, just as the economy appeared to have turned the corner from last year's debilitating contraction. The fresh crisis is still unfolding, Governor Shaktikanta Das said in his unscheduled address, acknowledging the challenge ahead. Stressing that it is imperative to both save lives and restore livelihoods, Mr. Das proposed a calibrated response, mooting a 50,000 Indian rupees crore term liquidity facility to boost credit availability for ramping up COVID-related healthcare infrastructure and services. Lenders have been urged to expedite lending under this priority sector classified scheme to entities including vaccine manufacturers, hospitals, pathology labs, suppliers of oxygen and ventilators, importers of COVID-related drugs and logistics firms. And although Mr. Das said the scheme would also cover patients requiring treatment, he failed to spell out how those most in need of financial assistance to cover their surging medical bills could borrow the funds. In directing the flow of credit to the sector most in focus at the moment, the RBI has signaled it is cognizant of the burden on healthcare and allied providers. However, how much lending capital-stressed banks would be willing to write into their COVID loan books remains to be seen. The central bank's focus on small borrowers including unorganized businesses and MSM enterprises, both through enhanced provision of credit via small finance banks and a fresh resolution framework for existing borrowings, is also hardening as these economic participants were already among the worst hit during last year's contraction. However, the norms laid down for resolution including the proviso that only those borrowers who had not already availed of restructuring assistance and whose loans were standard as on March 31, 2021, would be eligible for fresh resolution lays an onerous burden on those that the RBI itself admits are the most vulnerable. Mr. Das was also unreasonably sanguine about the economic impact of the second wave, even as he granted that high-frequency indicators are emitting mixed signals. The RBI's position that the dent to aggregate demand is likely to be only moderate is based on the fact that so far this year, the restrictions to contain the spread of the virus have been largely localized. With more and more voices from the opposition to top industry groups urging a nationwide lockdown to break the chain of transmission, Mr. Das may need to very quickly revisit his assumptions. Social murder and the missing state. The defense that the government is not responsible for the present crisis has consequences for India's democracy. PTI. When people are placed under conditions which appeal to the brute only, said Friedrich Engels, what remains to them but to rebel or to succumb to utter brutality? The scenes that are being witnessed in India now are apocalyptic in tone. When a citizen attacks hospital personnel because a life was lost due to the absence of medical care, or a citizen struggles to breathe with an oxygen cylinder on the pavement, it is a crisis at multiple levels. Appalling discourse. But what is concerning, more than the collapse of the system or the failure of the state, is the shocking discourse among the supporters of the government that it is not responsible for the present crisis, arguably, India's gravest hour. This defense has consequences for India's democracy. Engels had argued that the English ruling class and the state had created such horrendous working and living conditions for the workers, without the necessaries of life, that they suffer not only ill health but meet early deaths. Engels calls this social murder, the same as murder by an individual. The only difference is that this murder is disguised, or no man sees the murderer and the death appears to be a natural one. What we are seeing around, in our inability to make the state accountable, is social murder. The only difference between Engels' England in the 1840s, when it was the working class which was devastated by pandemics, and India now, is that the pandemic in this wave is not just preying on the most vulnerable populations. Therefore, it is also not invisible any longer. the state's actions. But in the first wave of the pandemic in India, the tragic plight of millions of interstate migrant labor walking thousands of kilometers remained invisible. That was a classic case of social murder. And it was justified then as well in narratives which argued that, after all, it was the responsibility of the workers themselves for voluntarily undertaking such a journey. Just as it is the responsibility of the people themselves for causing the second wave. Yet, ironically, when the successful defeat of COVID-19 was celebrated in February by an official resolution of the Bharatiya Janata Party, it was the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi that was given credit, not the people. When ordinary people, without access to expert advice, are asked to own up to their mistakes, powerful actors such as the Election Commission of India holding an 8-phase election in Bengal, the Uttarakhand Chief Minister justifying the Kumbh Mela and the Prime Minister exulting about the size of an election rally crowd in West Bengal on a day when over 2,000,000 Indians were newly infected by the novel coronavirus, are all unassailable actions of the state. By participating in the state's abdication of responsibility, one is fostering conditions of social murder. The argument that cremations cannot be shown by the media because they are sacred to Hindus is a part of this act. Other than the obvious fallacy that Hindu cremations are not televised or recorded, here, the more critical questions such as how many deaths could have been prevented by a simple provision of oxygen, why people are forced to cremate their loved ones in parking lots or pavements, and if that is any less dignified than telling the story to the world remain unanswered. As epidemiologists assert, obfuscating the real gravity of a pandemic is the dangerous path to a bigger disaster. If the Chinese state had not hidden the pandemic in its initial stages, the world probably would have not been at this juncture. That is why there has been such a sustained focus by the world media on hotspots where death tolls mounted: Italy, Iran, the United States, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Peru, etc. But the tragedy in India is sought to be portrayed as a cultural exceptionalism that cannot be televised. A different patrimonialism. In the last 7 years, the Indian state has acquired distinct tendencies of what sociologist Max Weber has called patrimonialism, in which the ruler exercises a traditional form of authority which rests on the sanctity of immemorial traditions, in contrast to a rule based on a rational legal bureaucracy or impersonal rules. But unlike an ideal typical patrimonialism, this highly personalized and centralist form of rule is not based on heredity, kinship ties, or personal allegiances, rather on the ideology of religious majoritarian as well as nationalism, and legitimized by election wins. Duty, patriotism, etc., become keywords here, as was tellingly witnessed during the misery unleashed by demonetization. Ironically, this patrimonial government, which prided itself as a My Bape Sarkar, the dispenser of benevolence towards subjects, overnight transforms itself into one which asks citizens to fend for themselves, whether it is by procuring oxygen cylinders or arranging ambulances. This has resulted in a social Darwinism in which only the most powerful have some chance of survival. From the assertions of the Union Health Minister that there never was any shortage of oxygen, the Uttar Pradesh government charging people with first information reports, FIRS, for requesting oxygen, to the Haryana Chief Minister's comment that the dead cannot return and, therefore, it was pointless to discuss many unaccounted deaths, all depict a state that has shed its professed benevolence during the novel coronavirus pandemic. As scholars identify, one of the fundamental problems in patrimonialism is ensuring accountability, something that becomes stark during a pandemic when the patrimonial state goes missing. On the one hand, we have the belated act of sanctioning oxygen plants by the Prime Minister, which, keeping in line with governance as benevolence, is met with cabinet ministers expressing their gratitude in unison. On the other, the Prime Minister has not addressed a single press conference on COVID-19, quite a stunning fact globally for the head of a democracy. Become citizens, not subjects. While the Swedish Prime Minister was recently subject to questioning by a constitutional committee on COVID-19 handling, the present Indian state has no means of ensuring a critical scrutiny of the chronology of government decisions that led to the current crisis. For the moment, we will have to be content with scathing observations like those of the Allahabad High Court that deaths due to lack of oxygen are no less than a genocide. Engels had argued that the English ruling class prejudice and preconceived opinions had enveloped it in a mad blindness about the social murder that was happening in its midst. which, in any case, did not affect it. India, under the pandemic, is seeing a different kind of prejudice, preconceived opinions, and mad blindness in sanctioning social murder. Unless people become citizens and not subjects under a patrimonial rule, the calamitous clouds of the pandemic portend a bleak future for Indian democracy as well. Nissim Manathakaran is with Dalhousie University, Canada. In Ireland's complex troubles, Lessons for India. A functioning democracy must commit to addressing communal issues with vigilance, tolerance, and compromise. Krishnan Srinivasan. AP Peter Morrison/AP. The communal clashes of April in Northern Ireland caught the media attention of many countries, but not in India, though the events carry relevant lessons and warnings for this country. Those riots, that left 74 policemen injured, threatened to undermine the fragile peace between Protestant pro-British loyalist Unionists who want to remain part of the United Kingdom forever, and Catholic pro-Irish nationalists who wish Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. The riots are the culmination of a complex mix of change, resistance to change, and ingrained political and social inertia. Northern Ireland altered enormously for the better after the signing of the Anglo-Irish Good Friday Agreement in 1998, and for the accord to have received strong support across the divided island was a remarkable achievement. This agreement began the process of dismantling border controls between the North and the Republic of Ireland, but subsequent developments showed that social issues remained unaddressed. Both religious communities experienced little or no peace dividend after the agreement, and poverty and deprivation linked to educational underachievement and high unemployment affects both nationalist and loyalist areas alike in Northern Ireland. There is an obvious lack of social and economic opportunities. 120,000 children are living in poverty, and more than 40,000 people remain on the social housing waiting list. Between 1998 and 2014, an abnormal number of suicides was registered, and that gloomy statistic keeps growing. The localities most deprived during the pre-agreement communal riots remain the most deprived areas within Northern Ireland today. Brexit, a stress test. Britain's break from the European Union, Brexit, was always going to prove a major stress test for Northern Ireland because 56% of its electorate voted to remain in the European Union. Much of the present anger relates to the specific protocol concerning Northern Ireland, which provided for the territory to remain in the customs union and single market of the European Union while protecting its status as part of the United Kingdom. Nevertheless, the Irish Protestant loyalists argue that the deal puts the Union at risk. The Unionist Party campaigned for Brexit on the basis that a United Kingdom outside the European Union would make a future United Ireland much more difficult to achieve, but the opposite has actually turned out to be true, and a United Irish Island is now being discussed in a way that scarcely seemed possible prior to the Brexit referendum of 2016. Accordingly, as a recent opinion article says, the Irish Catholic nationalists are talking up the prospects of achieving an early United Ireland and demanding a vote on it, which instills acute anxiety among the Union loyalists. In short, Brexit has encouraged a strong revival of identity polarisation, and a possible Irish Language Act, that would give the Irish tongue equal status to English in Northern Ireland, is feared by Unionists as yet another nail in the United Kingdom's coffin. Demography has changed since the Good Friday Agreement. No longer do Unionist parties have the majority, but political inertia prefers a vacuum, so progress toward an equitable and livable peace has stalled. The article adds, past traumas continue to weigh heavily on current politics in Northern Ireland, and that is unlikely to change as the twin challenges of managing the protocol and preventing communal violence occupy the attention in that territory, Dublin, and London in the years to come. Scheduled events. Elections scheduled next year to the Northern Ireland Assembly will be followed in 2024 by an important vote on the Northern Ireland Protocol because under the terms of the Brexit agreement, the Assembly will have to vote on whether or not to accept the continuing operation of the Protocol. Should Unionists decide to boycott this vote, the legitimacy of the Protocol will be thrown open to question. The timing of any potential Scottish referendum on independence, also likely to be held around 2024, may well further destabilize Northern Ireland's fragile politics, says the opinion article, https://bit.ly/3evi500. All things considered, there is no person more like a Northern Irish Catholic than a Northern Irish Protestant and vice versa, although obscurantists are loath to accept that basic reality. The fact that the people are just one, with parity in mutual fear, esteem, and consent, is never addressed, and artificial differences are played up by political elements wishing to stoke communal sentiments and keep both communities at the mercy of irresponsible and divisive forces. While the British, Irish, and American governments have condemned the violence, there is a lack of local political leadership to stabilize this volatile situation. Peace is an extraordinarily brittle entity, and any functioning democracy must ensure a daily commitment to addressing communal issues with vigilance, tolerance, and compromise. These are lessons to be drawn in India. The recent violence in Northern Ireland shows that every country needs leadership that takes responsibility for people's social and economic problems and steers prejudices away from entrenched phobias. The ruling party in India needs to be aware that creating religious tensions between communities has incalculable deep-seated negative consequences that will severely damage every section of society and all our established political and national institutions. Krishnan Srinivasan is a former Foreign Secretary. Thank you. Editorial 2. How the left front bucked a decades-old trend in Kerala welfare measures. The Pinarayi factor and good governance helped the LDF overcome allegations of corruption. For almost 4 decades, power in Kerala has alternated between the Communist Party of India, Marxist-led Left Democratic Front, LDF, and the Congress-led United Democratic Front, UDF. If this practice had continued, the UDF should have been voted to power in the just concluded elections. But the voters gave a clear mandate for a second term to the LDF. For the LDF, this was a key success in the wider context of national politics in general and the future of the left parties in particular. For the UDF, this election has given it a second term in the opposition and has proven to be a setback for the Congress, which was hoping to find a pathway for national recovery. The Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, led was hoping to emerge as an important third force, but it was left without a representative in the newly elected assembly. The LDF won a decisive mandate, clinching 99 seats and surpassing its tally in the previous House. It also saw an increase in its vote share compared to 5 years ago. The UDF won only 41 seats, a decline of 6 seats, but managed to retain more or less the same vote share that it had secured in the last assembly elections. Table 1. The BJP-led alliance lost the 1 seat it had and only saw a marginal increase in its vote share. While the BJP's vote share rose marginally, the vote share of its alliance partner, the Bharat Dharma Jana Sena, fell by 2.8%. A second chance. In the Uttar CSDS post-poll survey, when asked whether the LDF should get another term, 51% of the respondents categorically stated that it should, 27% were of the view that it should not, and 22% did not respond to the question. 5 years ago, the Uttar CSDS post-poll survey showed that 49% did not favor a second term for the incumbent UDF government and only 42% supported a second term for the sitting UDF. The post-poll data clearly indicate that the second term for the LDF was a byproduct of the public perception that the Chief Minister and the government had done a reasonably good job. 3/4 of the respondents, 73%, expressed satisfaction with the work done by the government. This was much higher than the satisfaction levels with the UDF government 5 years ago, 59%. The net satisfaction, those fully satisfied minus those fully dissatisfied, with the LDF government was 23% as opposed to minus 6% in the case of the UDF government in 2016, Table 2. In a separate question, voters were asked to compare the present LDF government with the previous UDF government. Close to half the respondents, 45%, rated the LDF government better, whereas only 3 of every 10 respondents, 28%, rated the UDF government as better. 2 of every 10 felt that both were equally good or bad. Table 3. The data further reveal that the respondents rated the LDF government high on most parameters. Table 4. Pinarayi's popularity. In his 5-year tenure, Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan had to face 2 floods as well as the Nipah outbreak and the COVID-19 pandemic. The welfare schemes launched by his government to give relief to the people during the national lockdown also appeared to bring the ruling alliance closer to the people. All but 6% of the respondents claimed to have benefited from the free food kits distributed by the government. Due to his government's work, Mr. Vijayan remained extremely popular and he was the preferred chief ministerial choice for 36% of the respondents. Former Chief Minister Oommen Chandy secured a distant second place with the support of 18%. No other leader in the state was able to secure even 5% of the total support for the chief ministerial candidate. State Health Minister KK Shalja was placed third, with 3% supporting her. The opposition leader, Ramesh Chennithala, was the choice for 3% of the respondents. The BJP's move of roping in Israt Haran, the Metro Man, did not work well. He was a choice for only 2% of the voters. The opposition parties had mounted an attack on the CPI-M-led left government for the various scams that had taken place during its time in power. However, there is little evidence of any negative impact of these scams on voting preferences. People's awareness about these scams seemed to be low. Given the literacy rates in Kerala and the high level of public awareness in general, the fact that a huge proportion of voters had either not heard of the scams or did not know whether the accusations were correct or not, 41%-51%, is indicative of the limited impact of these accusations. Table 5. The data show that the left was the preferred vote choice for many of these voters as well. The scams failed to negatively impact the LDF and the people focused more on welfare schemes such as free food kits and other measures. Corruption and scams was an election issue for a mere 2% of the voters. Party or candidate? Given the traditional rivalry between the LDF and UDF and the entry of the BJP as a third force, it was interesting to observe whether the party or candidate was more critical in defining electoral choice. 6 of every 10 respondents, 61%, said that they voted on the basis of party, while 3 in every 10, 29%, said they voted on the basis of the candidate. Mr. Vijayan was seen asking people to vote for the left in the name of development. When people were asked what was the main voting issue in these elections, development emerged as the biggest issue. Development was also the biggest issue in 2016, with a much larger proportion of voters saying it was an issue for them back then, 17%. Though the BJP tried hard, it failed to capitalize on the Sabrimala issue. This was a crucial factor for a mere 1% of the people. Surprisingly, close to 7 of every 10 voters did not respond to the question on what constituted the biggest issue for them. The left also had an edge among first-time voters and the poor. In fact, the biggest issue reported by the first-time voters was not development but the government's performance in the state. On the caste front, though the LDF lost some of its NER votes, as compared to 2016, possibly due to how the government handled the Sabrimala issue, it gained votes in the Ezava community, 53% of their vote. The election saw an increase in support for the LDF among both Muslims and Christians. In terms of reaching out to people during the election campaign, the data show that 6 in every 10 voters reported being approached by all the 3 alliances, which is a clear testimony that all the parties were making sure that no stone was left unturned in terms of campaigning and visibility. However, among those who were approached by all the 3 alliances, the LDF clearly had an advantage as 44% voted for the party, 37% voted for the UDF and 16% for the National Democratic Alliance. The LDF's victory is a strong endorsement of the performance of its government and leadership. The UDF was not able to present a chief ministerial face and the BJP failed to move beyond the margins in what continues to be an intense 2-alliance competition. KM Sajid Ibrahim is Professor, Department of Political Science, University of Kerala. R. Girish Kumar is Professor, Department of Political Science, University of Kerala. Vivatri is Research Associate, ICSDS, and Sandeep Shastri is Vice Chancellor, Jagran Lake City University Bhopal and the National Coordinator of the LNI Network. Votes for tackling the coronavirus effective COVID-19 management worked in favor of the LDF. A health worker collecting the nasal swab of a man for a COVID-19 test at a mobile lab at Palakkad. Mustafa KK. In 2020, Kerala was appreciated across the world for the manner in which it dealt with the pandemic. The national lockdown that was imposed in March 2020 left the daily wage laborers most vulnerable. To tackle the food crisis, the Pinarayi Vijayan-led left-front government in the state distributed food kits containing essential food grains and other items to all ration card holders in the state and also set up community kitchens across all panchayats. In the UTNI-CSDS post-poll survey, 94% of the respondents acknowledged that they had availed themselves of the facility of food kits at least once. Among them, most were satisfied with the kit, with only 11% expressing some element of dissatisfaction. Table 1. Even when the voters were asked to rate the overall steps taken by the state government to deal with COVID-19 over the last 1 year, 72% rated the steps as good. Another 21% rated the steps as average, with only a small chunk, 5%, according a bad rating. These kits, along with other initiatives, earned tremendous goodwill for the government and also translated into votes for the Left Alliance. Close to 6 of 10 voters who had rated the steps taken by the government as good voted for the party, 57%. A similar pattern was also seen among those who had availed themselves of the kit and were satisfied with it. Table 2. The data also show that 2/3, 67%, of the respondents acknowledged that at least one of their household members is working in the Gulf. Of them, 92% said that their family members send money back home. The pandemic caused a massive reverse migration of workers from the Gulf back to Kerala. The LDF government made various arrangements and provided financial assistance to those who could not go back abroad due to the lockdown. The data show that a majority of these Gulf households were tilted towards the UDF in their voting pattern, as they are mostly Muslim households. However, 4 in every 10 of these households wanted to give the LDF another chance. The work done by the left government during the pandemic was remarkable, not only on paper, but also in practice, as a majority of the voters had availed themselves of the benefits of the government's schemes. This work surely translated into the LDF gaining people's trust. Not ready for a third force, there seems to be little desire for an alternative to the LDF and UDF. Vivatri. Kerala, which has been dominated by 2 alliances, saw the Prime Minister call for a third alternative in the state while launching his party's campaign. However, the BJP failed to save the lone seat of Nemam it won in 2016. Despite a campaign revolving around the Sabrimala Temple Row, love jihad and corruption cases against the left, it did not succeed in attracting voters. It saw only a marginal increase in its vote share. On being asked whether there is a need for a third alternative in Kerala's politics, more than half the respondents, 56%, disagreed and 1/3, 33%, agreed. Even among those who agreed, the vote was split equally among the 3 alliances. Among those who did not respond to the question, LDF had a clear advantage with 46% of the votes in its favor. Table 1. Furthermore, when people were asked whether the rise of the BJP in the state is good or bad for the social fabric, a majority said that it was bad, 54%, and 17% responded in the affirmative. The remaining 29% either felt that it would make no difference or did not respond to the question. As one would expect, the NDA had a huge advantage among those who felt that the rise of the BJP is good for the social fabric of the state. The LDF was the favored party among those who said that the BJP's presence is bad or will make no difference. Table 2. The presence of the BJP has changed the political equation to some extent in Kerala. Yet, the state does not seem to be fully ready to experiment with a third alternative, and the election results reflect this fact. Social demographics shaped the elections. The LDF consolidated support among the social groups which generally vote for it. Women voters waiting in queue to cast their vote in Palakkad. Mustafa KK. Hibatri. UTNI-CSDS post-poll survey data indicate that the LDF's vote share saw a significant improvement among select social groups. When levels of access to education are taken into account, the LDF performed better than the UDF across all education levels, though the gap was much wider among the non-literate group and those who had access to higher education. The NDA got little support from the non-literate segments, though its support among those with access to education was more or less consistent. When it came to different age groups, support for the LDF was higher compared to the UDF. The difference was the sharpest in the 26 to 35 category. There seemed to be a sharp decline in support in the less than 25 age group for the NDA as compared to the previous assembly election. There was not much of a gender variation when it came to support for the LDF, while the UDF's voters had a much higher proportion of women. On the other hand, the NDA performed much better among male voters compared to female voters. The LDF maintained its popularity among the poor. A little over half, 53%, voted for the alliance. The NDA lost its traditional support from among the middle and rich classes compared to the last election. While support for the LDF declines as one moves from the poor to the rich, the reverse trend holds good for the UDF. This election witnessed a considerable decline in popularity in the NDA's core support group, young, educated, men, and those belonging to middle and upper economic classes. The LDF, on the other hand, consolidated its support among the social groups which generally voted for it. Thank you. Other important news. Lack of income causing anxiety. Workers in rural Kerala are badly hit. Kerala Bureau Kochi. Shanthi M., a 53-year-old from a family dependent on dairy farming in the Rayamangalam Panchayat along the eastern suburbs of Ernakulam district, has dumped down the drain nearly 17 liters of milk daily ever since 2 members of her family tested positive for COVID-19. There are no takers for milk from an infected household. Nor is the family at liberty to cut grass from the neighborhood to feed the cattle. While the second wave forces through rural Kerala, it is loss of livelihood that are worrying many. Babaraj Kothamudath of Shanali near Parambra in Kochikode, who earns a living by renting out utensils and generators for public and private events, has been in dire straits ever since the pandemic hit in March 2020. His hopes of a recovery has now been dashed by the second wave-induced cancellation or postponement of events. PC Sathyan, who runs a printing press in Nakad, says the pandemic put a stop to arrival of paper from China, which led to price rise and a fall in quality. There is loss of business too, he said. Shivu, 40, an auto rickshaw driver who used to take tourists around Kovalam and Vishinjam in Thiruvananthapuram, is among the many casual workers whose livelihoods have been derailed. He has been working in plantations lately. Free ration has helped his family. Repository of Mercy. Koratashvan, in his Vardaraja Stavam, refers to Lord Vardaraja of Kamchi as Srinathan and also Dayanathan. The description of the Lord as Srinathan reminds us of the role of Goddess Mahalakshmi in bringing us close to the Lord, and thereby paving the way for our eventual liberation. He is also Dayanathan. He is the repository of Daya, mercy. His mercy is not finite. It is a wealth of mercy, which is what saves his devotees. Koratashvan also uses the description Sarvabhuta Sardam for Lord Vardaraja. That means he has no enemies. But if that were so, then why did he kill during his avataras? Those he killed were inimical to his devotees, and this earned his wrath. They were punished for the sin of tormenting his devotees, elaborated P.B. Rajahamsam in a discourse. Once during one of Parasrabhata's discourses, a Sishya told him that he wanted to see Lord Narasimha and offer prayers. Parasrabhata told him that he could pray to Lord Ranganatha, with a request for his appearance in the form of Narasimha. The Lord would oblige, provided, of course, that there was a Prahlada among the people there. Could anyone consider himself the equal of Prahlada? He came as Narasimha, because of the unshakable bhakti of Prahlada, in the face of torture and attempts to kill him. Anyone else would have given up his devotion and fallen in line with Hiranyakasipu's orders. But the child remained steadfast. That kind of devotion, naturally, was rewarded by the Lord. One way to know the Supreme One is through a study of the Vedas. This lustrous one made Hastigiri his abode. Even the Vedas are unable to fully reveal his glory. But Hastigiri, the hill on which he stays in Kanchipuram, shows all his luminousness to the world. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching this video. Do like, share and comment. Press the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to get new notifications. Thank you. Take care and stay safe. God bless you all.